absolutely. One of the reasons why I'm here is I think that you could kind of argue that Western spirituality, even mystical religion, Eastern spirituality, philosophy, and the sciences, including physics, all seem to be saying this with different language. And that is, well, and I'll tell you what the difference is when it comes to spirituality, at least the way I've seen it, is that there's only one thing, Brittany. Mm-hmm. There's only one thing. And every other thing that appears is just a manifestation of the one thing. Like right now, I see you, your bodily physical appearance. And if it was possible, which it's not, but if it was, if I looked into your eyes, I could somehow look into your eyes deep enough to the very foundation of what you are, I would discover that it's my foundation also, and we're both a mind-body manifestation of the one ground of being.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of our Living with Jesus series. I am host Brittany Shawley, and this podcast is where we have a chance to meet people from all walks of life and all different faith backgrounds, most of which are outside the box of typical religion, but they live and work with Jesus Christ. They also know that they are here to bring about a new reality on this planet that starts by changing our own minds and our relationship with Him. So I am beyond grateful to introduce our guest today. His name is Jim Palmer. Jim used to be a mega church leader in America. Let's just say he's not doing that anymore, but I'll let him share his story with you. But even though he stepped down from his previous position at the church, that does not mean he stopped serving. In fact, he has founded the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality and is also the author of many books, including Notes from Over the Edge, Divine Nobodies, Being Jesus in Nashville, and his most recent book, Inner Anarchy, Dethroning God and Jesus to Save Ourselves and the World. So, Jim, it is an honor and a true gift to have you with us today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm really excited about being here. So I'm kind of looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. I've been looking forward to this for a while. So this makes me really happy. So let's just dive in. Let's just start at the top and we'll work our way through and just see where we're led in this conversation. Right. But the first question I have for you is, how did you see Jesus before versus how you see Jesus now? Like, can you tell us a little bit about your story in relationship to Jesus?
Yes. So, I grew up in a fairly volatile childhood and youth environment. So, my mother was an alcoholic. She suffered from mental illness. My father left when I was very young. My older brother was a very violent individual. So, childhood and youth was traumatic and volatile. My senior year in high school, a new person on our football team, we had breakfast at McDonald's, and sitting in McDonald's over, hash browns and orange juice, he shared with me that he thought God could change my life. I confided in him some of my struggles. So sitting in that McDonald's in Blacksburg, Virginia, I accepted Jesus. I prayed the sinner's prayer, right? I go off to college. I was going to play football in college. I had a severe injury, which prevented me from doing that, but I went anyway. So my first week at college, I run into the campus director of the Campus Crusade for Christ Ministry, which is a parachurch organization that's on campuses throughout the U.S. and go around the world and do short-term mission projects and things like that. So I got involved in that, and that was very helpful because it was the first time I kind of figured out a sense of self as a person. Like, I discovered, I could speak, I could lead. I began accepting leadership positions, became like the student body president of the ministry, and then befriended a gentleman who was starting a church in the college town. I met him, got involved, and he's the one who influenced me to become a pastor. So went to Chicago, went to Trinity Divinity School, got my master's in divinity. While I was there, discovered a church called Willow Creek Community Church, went on staff at that church. At the time, that was the largest church in North America, became a pastor at that church. And then a group of us decided to leave to start, a mega church or non-denominational contemporary church in other parts of the country. And I chose the South, which is Nashville, Tennessee. So, I guess I would say, to answer your question, that through that process, my thinking of Jesus was heavily conditioned through, evangelicalism, my seminary theology, which was fairly evangelical, kind of the traditional story. We're separated from God. Jesus died to fix that. And as long as you kind of hold the right beliefs or behaviors and so on, then, the payoff is when you die and you go to heaven. So anyway, that theology I represented for many years as a teacher. I stood before a sea of faces teaching that theology until I realized that despite my bulletproof, seminary-approved, theology, that the problems in people's lives in the congregation persisted. Like I noticed that one day it hit me. People are still depressed. People are still in broken relationships. People still have anxiety. There seems to be chronic unhappiness. And so I saw that all this was true. Then I looked in the mirror, and in a moment of self-honesty, I accepted, Brittany, that it was also true for me. I mean, people looked to me to be the authority on, good biblical information about God. And yet, I can't say I felt a deep peace. There was anxiety. I was running around trying to manage this huge church. I had my own brokenness, even unhealed trauma from my past. So I decided there's something wrong and I need to leave to figure it out. So I left my ministerial career. I left the church. I left my identity. I left my Christianity as I knew it at that time, with the question, what went wrong? Why is this not working? What is the problem? And that's when I started writing Divine Nobodies. I've written a bunch of books since then, but that's kind of how it all got started.
Wow. So what came of asking that question? Like, I want to keep hearing more. Like, so when you ask, like, okay, well, what was the problem? Like, what did you discover?
Well, I discovered a lot. So the first thing I did is I immersed myself in the lived human experience and common humanity, right? Like before then, I was sort of, like in the echo chamber of my Christian subculture. Even though I went to a secular university, I was in Christian ministry, Campus Crusade for Christ. I went to seminary, became the megachurch pastor. So it was the Christian subculture, and all the seminary answers that I learned worked. You could make them work in Christian subculture. But then outside of Christian subculture, I started seeing, okay, this doesn't work. And what happened is that God began to connect me with a lot of unsuspecting people who challenged what I thought I knew about God, myself, the world, life. These were not like the Waffle House waitress, a car mechanic, a hip hop musician, a girl with an intellectual disability. Like these were the people that God sent across my path to uneducate me to some extent on all this theology, that I learned. So in time, I just began to deconstruct it. Like I sat down, okay, what are my core beliefs and how did I get here? And I went through that process, and in so doing, dismantled huge chunks of my Orthodox Christian theology. But the piece I could not deconstruct away was Jesus. That was the part that I didn't know what to do with. Even after I deconstructed the theological edifice of which Jesus was the top, I didn't know what to do with Jesus. So I kind of had an answer in Wide Open Spaces, my second book, but it didn't sit quite right. And I kept working through it. And then by the time I got to the book, Being Jesus in Nashville, the idea was I was going to take a year of my life and I was going to test the premise that I could do anything that Jesus did because there's no difference between Jesus and myself.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Now,
Whoa.
everyone was super excited about that. The idea of the book writing itself, like
Right.
what's going to happen. Now, of course, my publisher, they all knew, well, of course, Jim's going to figure out he's not Jesus and it's going to be a funny story and people are going to love to read it, but that's not what happened.
Okay.
What happened is I wrote the book and wrote myself into a dilemma where I was accused of being a heretic and beyond the bounds of Orthodox Christian theology. And the book was never published and my book contract was canceled.
Oh.
And that's when it was not just me, Rob Bell was another one. We were friends and we both kind of got booted from our publishers as a result of writing books that tinkered with Orthodox Christian beliefs that in our particular publishing houses, or at least the divisions we're writing in, was not something that they could accept. So now, like, what I've kind of come to at the end of all that is that I believe that Jesus has universal significance and relevance for every human being. It doesn't matter if you're an atheist or a Christian or a Buddhist or a Hindu or whatever it is. I see that Jesus is universally significant and relevant, but not for the reasons I originally thought, but for different reasons that I think are more important than the ones I learned. Like, for example, that I think you could make the argument pretty easily that the truth that Jesus most demonstrated is that there is no separation from God. That when Jesus said that I was divine, it's not that Jesus was divine and kind of but not exactly human. In my view, Jesus was saying that there is no separation between God and humankind. And once you get there, you kind of got to start rethinking the whole gospel, which is based on that separation, right? Original sin, God cannot look on anything wicked, God cannot let you into heaven. And therefore, there needs to be some way of getting out of this, which is, the atonement sort of idea that you often find in Christianity. Brittany, I would even go as far as to say, when I wrote about this recently, that one of the things that Jesus has in common, even with the atheist, is that Jesus did not believe in the God of religion. In fact, Jesus attacked, or Jesus affirmed what he found to be redeeming and meaningful in his religious tradition of Judaism, but he also was heavily critical of the ways that he felt that the traditional religious teachings of the day were corrupting the ultimate truth of, God and humankind not being separated. Sometimes I will say, well, Jesus didn't even believe in God, but what I mean by that is that, Jesus did not believe in that God of religion. In fact, there's one time, Brittany, if you remember, Jesus says, that like there's a conversation where Jesus says, your father is Satan, or, the one that you're, well, what does he mean there? I think what he's meaning there is that, not everybody's definition of God, especially toxic religion's definition, is right. And speaking of the atheists, when a lot of people that I know who are atheists, what they're saying is that I can't believe in that God. That narrative about God, it can't be true. And I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to keep talking unless you.
I love listening to all of this.
Unless you intervene and stop me. But
this is exactly what I want. This is perfect, because a lot of people on my channel have fully, for the most part, pulled away from typical religion. And a lot of them have found the relationship to Jesus and God through A Course in Miracles, or through spirituality, or through direct contact, direct experience. And so this is so refreshing, and I think really, really important to hear as well, because there's so many people who are in limbo and they have ties to the Christian faith, but they're afraid to leave because of all the stuff they've been told that might happen to them if they do, right? The whole punish, going to hell, terrifying ideas, in my opinion. But as you continue to go through this exploration of who Jesus actually is compared to what religion taught, and who God actually is compared to what religion taught, can you maybe give us more of an understanding of what you came to? Like, who is Jesus now fully in your eyes, and who is God now in your experience?
Yes. Let me also, before that, say one thing real quick about A Course in Miracles.
Yeah, sure.
Because I've studied the Course in Miracles and been in groups studying through the Course in Miracles. In fact, just about a week ago, I was on a call with a group of people who were working through the Course in Miracles. Okay. So here's one of the legitimate criticisms of the Bible is that it doesn't, even if you can read it in a way that gives you the best possible thinking about God and so on, as opposed to very fundamentalist toxic reading. Even with that, though, one of the things the Bible doesn't really do is flesh it out. Like, it doesn't flesh a lot of stuff out, and then it's kind of open to interpretation. Like, well, what does the atonement mean? What does this mean? What does oneness mean? So on and so forth. The thing I appreciate so much about the Course of Miracles, which is why I think it's an absolutely unique, extraordinary work, is that it does that. It fleshes out the meaning of the biblical themes, but not only that, it does it in a liberating way. Like, honestly, I can't think of a commentary would come close to fleshing out the biblical themes and teachings and so on better than the Course of Miracles. I mean, it's unbelievable. And because, of course, this is what I'm trying to do often, just because people are left with these ideas from religious Christianity, because the Bible doesn't offer a whole lot more than just like a few verses, people have a hard time imagining it being different. But A Course in Miracles really does that. Okay, so where am I on God and Jesus? So, okay, one thing is that, and I've taught some linguistic classes along the way in my life. So language is the social technology that Homo sapiens created in order to cooperate and propagate our species forward.
Love that.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
The thing is that, kind of what postmodern thinking, if you want to call it that, one of the gifts to civilization has been that it deconstructs language in this sense, that language is deceiving. Like, for example, if I say the word chair, what's going to happen is I can say that to any person. If I say it in the right language, virtually every person is going to roughly think about the same thing, which is this like thing you sit in that bears your weight. It's a chair. Okay. Now we know that there isn't really an objective thing in the universe called a chair. We invented the word as a symbol so we could talk about it, right? Now, that works really good if you're talking about a chair, or you're talking about a bottle, or but the more abstract you get, the more it breaks down. So take the word God. Okay. Now, just like there's no chair, right? It's a word. There is no thing like called God that objectively exists somewhere, in the sense that the word God as a word that's spoken, is a linguistic symbol that roughly identifies something on the level of ultimate reality, right? And then after that, it's like whether you're theist or you're, pantheist, or, there's all sorts of options in that, So here's where I'm at. And actually, one of the reasons why I'm here is I think that you could kind of argue that Western, at least Western spirituality, even mystical religion, Eastern spirituality, philosophy, and the sciences, including physics, all seem to be saying this with different language. And that is, well, and I'll tell you what the difference is when it comes to spirituality, at least the way I've seen it, is that there's only one thing, Brittany.
Mhm.
There's only one thing. And every other thing that appears is just a manifestation of the one thing. Like right now, I see you, your bodily physical appearance. And if it was possible, which it's not, but if it was, if I looked into your eyes, I could somehow look into your eyes deep enough to the very foundation of what you are, I would discover that it's my foundation also, and we're both a mind-body manifestation of the one ground of being. So, and the Bible even says is, we have our being in God, through God, as God, and so on. Physics essentially says the same thing. Physics has discovered that contrary to prior belief, the universe is not like some big space with individual things like planets in it. No, it appears that way, it presents that way, but it's actually just tied together by one, whatever you want to call that, energy, force, life, existence,
Love.
right, yes. So, okay. So I'm glad you said that. So let's, so in other words, if you ask me, what do you believe God is? I would say, well, I believe that there's one thing, and that's the ground of all being, and anything that exists. And by the way, this is why hell can't be real. This is why separation from God can't be real. Because if it was possible for you or I, Brittany, to somehow have a self-sustaining existence apart from God, that would make us God, but we can't. That's why the psalmist says, where can I go from your presence? The answer is nowhere. Yeah. So, but here's the thing I think that about what Jesus was saying is about God. Are we supposed to believe that Jesus really thought that God was, a fatherly male figure sitting on some throne in the sky? I don't think so. Okay, but then why did Jesus call God Father? And I'll tell you why I think he did. Because I think what Jesus was saying is, Jesus was saying that when he experiences and touches that ground of all being, the word that is the best, the thing he most goes to describe what it's like is love, which he kind of uses the metaphor of father that would have made sense in that culture in a certain kind of way for people to get what he was trying to say. Because look, Brittany, there's only a couple of places in the Bible where God is just defined right out. One of them is God is love. It doesn't say that God does loving things. It says that God is love. You could say that love is God. If God is love, love is God. The point is that there is never any moment where any human being in any circumstance is God's disposition, the ground of all being. Like you said, you could use the word to characterize that. I think it's because we experience it in a very deeply personal way. And remember, love is still just a word like all the other words, but it's the best word we know to use to describe what it feels like. And on top of that, we'll even take the Buddha. When the Buddha had his moment of enlightenment, this, as the story goes, the Buddha kind of lets go. He tried everything to be liberated. It didn't work. None of the religious things he did, none of it works. He goes, sits under the Bodhi tree and says, I'm not getting out of here until I figure it out. He sits under the Bodhi tree. He kind of lets go of his attachments, and he kind of starts to tumble back into an experience of the ground of all being, the nature of reality, whatever you want to call that. And a common story is probably not even true, but one thing that people say is that the moment he was enlightened, what he did is he smiled. He smiled because How can you not smile when you feel that? How can you not smile when you touch that eternal ground of being, that complete, whole, timeless, infinite, like it feels like love. It feels like peace. It feels like wholeness. And so that's how I think of God.
The thing that is so amazing, because you said you know studied the course a little bit, but even beyond that, I feel like it's always so fascinating that when people turn inward to really ask these big questions, what is God, what is Jesus, what is reality, that we all seem to come to the same understanding. Like when you're talking about like God is love, like before I could even say God, like it was so foreign for me. It was like I couldn't even say Jesus, like they're very foreign words for me. But when I first had my experience of like the eternal love that is ever present and now, like I remember going, oh my God, how can this not be real? How can this not be real? This is the realest thing ever. And just exploding with just this closeness that I felt with this love that I'm part of, that I can never be separate from, that I'm safe in, that is always here and now. And it was just so beyond this world, but yet in this world, that as I let love lead me, it started to be okay that I called it God. And I really resonate with what you were saying about Jesus in relationship to calling him Father, because to me, like Father represents a relationship, right? A closeness, right? And so to me, like God is my Father. He's my creator. He's my source. You can't get closer of a relationship than that. And
Yeah.
just like a father and his child, a loving father and his child would never be separate. Same with our loving Father and us as his children. And to me, I feel like that was Jesus's main thing. Like, hey, I'm here to demonstrate that God is love, and so are we. Let's love our neighbors. Let's love our brothers. Let's love ourselves. Like, love is all there is. And that's when I look with this lens of love, I can see that all over the Bible. But I can also see that if we're not trained in that perception, there's so much junk in there that can scare the crap out of us, that prevent us from hearing the voice for love to begin with. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of people, when they leave religion and they start to deconstruct their beliefs, sometimes what they come to is this, it feels, existential angst, right? Because the answers that they previously had faith in, for whatever reason, they decide that those answers don't hold weight for them anymore, which throws them in some existential angst. I don't know anything anymore. I don't know what the purpose of life is. I don't know, there's all these questions don't have answers to. And then they kind of go on a wild goose chase to find better answers to the same questions. But, I often say to people, look, everything you need to know, all the important things you need to know, you already know. And one example of that would be, it's just one example. Like if I ask somebody if they believe in love, it doesn't matter if you're an atheist or whatever, then, like, of course people believe in love, right? Like it's self-evident. We know that love is good. Love is good when you give it. Love is good when you receive it. We know it's self-evident that the world would be a better place if there was more love and less hate. So this is why love has always been kind of the preeminent expression of, the height of every religion, every philosophy, every spirituality and so on. It's love. So just taking that one thing, here's one question that every person could ask themselves in every moment. It's a question you could always ask. And if all you do in this lifetime is you answer this question, that's all you need to do. It's all you need to do. You could get through several lifetimes by just doing this one thing, which is at any moment, if you ask the question, what does it mean right now for me to be love? Now, here's the thing. You are love, right? Because if the ground of all being, let's use the word love for God, for the ground of all being. So you actually are love in that sense. But the question is, what does it mean for me to be love right now? Like, right, that was the challenge that Jesus had. What does it mean to be divine and human? And how do I work this out? And even though we only had that Luke verse about how he grew in stature, we didn't have the privilege to see how he worked all that out, how he learned to be both divine and human. So in terms of being loved, I'm not saying that the answer is always easy, right? Like being loved with your best friend is different from being loved with someone who harmed or abused you, or people that are mean to you, or people that you don't like, or people from the different political party that you have a trouble with, or whatever. So I'm not saying the answer is always easy. I'm just saying that it's always the right question. And it could be look, if a person doesn't know what's the meaning of life, what's the purpose of life, how am I supposed to live, what really matters, like that question, you can go a long way with that question as a guiding, unifying principle for your life. That's just one. You can do the same thing with compassion. What does it mean right now for me to be compassionate? You could think about, because look, the ground of all being, like there's an infinite sea of potentialities and possibilities that we actualize in the lived human experience. And a person can, determine for themselves what exactly is inspiring for them, being courage, being love, being compassion, being wisdom, whatever it is.
Oh, Jim, I love that. That's like something I wanted to ask you later, and you answered it now, which is so beautiful. I'm a really big fan of the golden rule. Like, I feel like I try and live my life by the golden rule. Like, as you give, you receive. Like, as I know my brother, I know myself. As I give love, I receive love. And so the idea of asking, like, how can I be most loving, to me is in complete accord with God's law of giving as you receive. And to me, that is the fastest way to experience that you are love, is by being a channel and a giver of that love.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. And so maybe a personal question for you, like, what do you do? Like, do you do anything specifically with Jesus? Like, do you pray? Like, do you meditate? Do you have a morning routine? Do you have whatever? Can you talk to me about how you live your life with knowing these ideas of love and Jesus, and how you try and serve others? I don't know if I asked the best question there, but I think you understand.
Yeah. Well, I think that, so there's a phrase that I learned from a Buddhist friend, which is he would talk about perfuming his mind with truth, because it's true that the world and the lived human experience, we become so enamored with what's happening like out here that we lose touch with what's real down here. Like now, of course, the idea is to bring what we know down here to bear into what happens up here.
Yes.
So that, like, for example, when I'm interacting with someone, like right now, there is a mind-body Brittany that I'm now talking to. There's a Brittany personality, there's a Brittany appearance, there's a Brittany's life she lived up to this point, and I'm connecting with that mind-body personality Brittany. And it just so happens that, like, well, it's not that difficult to do, right? Because you're a nice person. We have a connection with some of our thinking about various things and so on, but swap it out and put a person over there who, like, is someone that maybe it's not so nice, for whatever reason. And at that point, it's the realization that, past the mind body, even past the behavior, past everything that I can access to my sensory experience, that there's something beyond that which I always do have a connection to, and that is valuable and is the ultimate source of that person's worth, and affects the way it can affect, it should affect how I participate in the connection with that person. So all that to say, back in the day when I was a religious person, I had a daily quiet time, right? So I sat down, I read the Bible, I did my prayers, then I got up and left, and somehow that, like, didn't go with me,
Right.
And that's how religion becomes a checklist, right? Read my Bible, check, prayed, check, did this, check, the checklist, and it doesn't really, it's not deeply transformational. So I think that it's typical for me to get up in the morning and to do what this person called to perfume my mind, to make myself aware, to, I think as the Course in Miracles maybe points this out, to remember to myself what is ultimately real and true. And I don't just, and that kind of can become something that I've learned to do anywhere. I'm running a trail, for example, when I run, and I can remember, I can let everything on the trail, for example, be an invitation to knowing the ultimate reality that exists in that moment, even as I run. Yes, I see the beauty of the trees, I feel the rocks beneath my feet, but they're also an invitation to a remembering of what is ultimately real and true. But perfuming my mind in the morning, like it could be reading, like there was a time it could be reading the Course in Miracles, it could be reading I Am That by Maharaj, it could be any number of things that sort of like perfume my mind with that kind of ultimate what is most real and true from a spiritual, not spiritual, but in a real foundational sense. And the other thing that I came to is that, like, transformation for me wasn't so much seeing different things, like, like now that I sort of understand God and Jesus in these ways, that I should start, seeing everything show up in my life differently. What I realized instead is that it's not necessarily seeing different things, but it's seeing things differently. Mm. It's me seeing life differently. Mm-hmm. Because the lived human experience is characterized by fragility, impermanence, change, temporality, and so it's volatile. Like there's an aspect of the lived human experience that is like that, right? So, and this is why sometimes religion can get people off track, maybe a little bit, is suggesting that, I don't know, once you become a Christian, or if you have enough faith, or if you believe the right things, it just like becomes, problem free, which we know, right? That can't be real. If it was, Jesus failed miserably, and so did Paul, like in terms of the troubles and volatility they had. So, but it's, like realizing that everything, making space for the totality of the lived human experience, all of it, without resistance, without indulging it, and seeing it all as an invitation to be more profound, to grow more deeply, to be an expression of love, to find God in it, and that it's all of that.
Yes. If you have more, keep going.
Well,
I don't want to stop you.
I think that Jesus, he sort of gifted into the universe the human expression of that ground of all being, that ultimate reality, that love essence, and but he was not protected from the volatility of the lived human experience, and the full spectrum of emotions and heartaches and loneliness and betrayal and hardship, like Jesus experienced that. And so I think that one of the reasons why, like in Hebrews, the idea is that Jesus is the perfect high priest, is that he's someone who fully participated in the lived human experience. And sometimes that was agonizing. But that's the deal, like, I don't know, maybe it's true there are millions of universes. Maybe on some other universe someday I'll be like divine and Martian, but right now I'm divine and human. So I'm incarnating that divine love essence through the lived human experience with the mind and body, engaging and participating in that fragile, impermanent, ever-changing, temporal, reality. And it's not escaping it. Sometimes, Brittany, sometimes I'll do meditation. I'll do a meditation, and the whole point of the meditation is for me to offer a space of hospitality to anything that arises in my thoughts, my feelings, even bodily sensations, and to let them come and go without judgment, without resistance, or without indulgence. And what I learned by doing that is I can make a space of hospitality for all of it. If I can do that for 10 minutes of meditation, then maybe I can do that, for the totality of my lived human experience. I don't have to say, this is the bad stuff and this is the good stuff. I can make a space for all of it, and it be, and connected to my spirituality. And this is why, like the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality. Okay, I started that. But the conviction of it is that spirituality is universally relevant and significant for individual and collective well-being, and that we're really missing something if we think of the lived human experience from a purely materialist point of view. And so the idea of spirituality, I think, is universally relevant, necessary. We're not going to get there individually or collectively, apart from that. But here's the thing, okay? So right now, we're sitting here, okay? And this idea of the fragility of the world, it's changed. So, thoughts are coming and going, feelings are coming and going, bodily sensations are coming and going, right? I just had a thought and the thought was there and then it left. So, but it's interesting that with all that coming and going, there's something that never goes, right? It's not like you have a thought and the thought goes and Brittany goes with the thought or Jim goes with that feeling. No, there's always something there. There was a Jim before the thought. There was a Jim during the thought. There's a Jim after the thought. There's a Brittany before the feeling, during the feeling, after the feeling. So the question is, what is that? Like, what is the part of you that never goes anywhere? What is the part of you that's always there, that doesn't come and go? And that's why I think that one of the greatest questions for a person to discover some of the deepest truths for themselves is to ask the question, what am I? Because it can't just be what you think, what you feel, your personality traits, your bodily sensations, because that is always changing, right? Like, you were once a toddler, then you were a teenager, now you're adult, once you thought about things. There's no stable, the only reason in a way that you and I are right here, right now, and I recognize you and you recognize me, and like anybody would recognize you, as Brittany and so on, is that there is a patterning that has occurred, and that patterning, the way that we're experiencing it, there's a Brittany and there's a Jim. Right? My patterning is different, and yours is different. And we recognize each other. If I saw you on the street, I'd be like, oh, there's Brittany. Or if I heard your voice, I'd say, oh, there's Brittany. Or if I heard you talking about or writing something, I could recognize you in it, in that pattern. But all that, there's a lot of evolution from being a toddler to getting into the elder years of your life. So, but there's something that's always there. It never changes. And so it's something, and ever changes. like it doesn't go away. Like even after the mind body ceases to function, but there's the thing that never changed, like the coming and the going, even with the coming and going of the mind and body, so
Jim, see, I feel like you used the analogy of like stripping back what the physical senses see and like looking into someone and looking into the depths of their beingness and like recognizing them basically. And I feel like that's the changeless, like the course calls it the changeless reality, right? Like I feel like that's what you're talking about, is that if we no longer let our physical eyes, our physical ears, our physical senses perceive the physical body of another, although we can recognize it, like you're saying, and see it is there, but allow our eyes to be more inwardly focused, to see the internal beingness that never changes in another, like that to me is the exchange of what is real. That to me is what Jesus perfected, right? Is seeing the love beyond the form. And even though he had to participate, I'm just going to call it insanity of this world, because it is, he did, we do, he learned and trained himself to see the love beyond that. And that's why I feel like he's the greatest demonstration, because of all the hell he was put through and all the pain and suffering that was inflicted upon him, he was still able to stand up there and say, like, forgive them for they know not what they do. Like, who and what else but a constant unchanging love that knows there is no opposite would be able to proclaim such a thing?
yeah.
You know? And so I feel like this is what you're talking about.
Well, I think, it's interesting that there's that time when Jesus says that, like, for the joy, like I do this. So I changed my language on this some years ago, which
Okay.
is like, and it's not perfect, right? We're being human is okay. We're supposed to be human, right? But I used to think kind of like, well, I have to do like I have to go to work today, or I have to deal with this problem. I have to like deal with this person. I have to, that was the language that I used. But what I learned from what Jesus said about for the joy is I changed the language to this. The language is, I get to incarnate divine loving essence as a human being today. I get to participate in a lived human experience. I get to deal with this person in front of me that I don't like. I get to, like, I'm not saying that, it's not really mind over matter. And I'm not saying that like it's not okay to have your full range of human beings, human emotions. It's okay, to get angry, to get hurt and all this kind of thing. But I'm just saying that there was a little bit of a shift where I knew I needed to stop, because here's what religion does sometimes. Religion is like, okay, well, religion's never been very fond of the body. It's always been the problem, right? Like, every sin's got something to do with the body. When you die, you lose your body, or at least you get a better one, and so the body's always a problem. The church has always been obsessed about, sins related to the body and so on and so forth, and so the body does kind of gets a bad rap, so to speak. But, but I get to give expression to that divine loving essence through my participation in the lived human experience. And the challenge of Jesus was being divine and human, right? You can be either on their own, but the real challenge is being both. Jesus said, I'm in this world, but I'm not of this world. He didn't dispute that he was in it. And I don't just mean location, in it, like,
totally committed here.
Yeah. Like in it to win it, like in it to
totally.
be, but he knew that he was not of this world, that there was another reality that was what, he most fundamentally was. So I don't want to go through my life saying I had to do this, and when I die, it's gonna be great because I'm gonna go to heaven. I'm gonna walk on streets of gold. It's gonna be an eternal Disneyland, and I'll be happy every act. No, like, look, the good part is now. I mean, like, the good part meaning this is what's we get to be human.
Yeah.
And that's why Jesus is the perfect high priest, because he knows that sometimes we're like, God bless this. And Jesus is like, I know. I mean, you got it. It's an in the world thing. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe, there could be another universe and it's different. There could be some other experience, but right now, right here, it's a in the world thing. And so, I don't want to hate it.
Yeah.
And but let's also say that one of the most important things that we all need is self-compassion. We are human. We don't do everything perfect. And we're not going to do any of this perfect. We're not going to wake up in the morning and say, I get to fix this flat tire on the side of the interstate. We're probably not going to say that, or we may not. But, that's part of the lived human experience. And, I could say something like it's the least real part of it, because we know that it represents something that's changing and temporal.
Right.
And that the most really real part of it, which is the part that never changes, is always there. You can't increase it. You can't diminish it. You can't make it better. You can't make it worse. You can't enhance it. Like, it is complete, all its own unto itself. But I think that, like, the regulating pathway is to have compassion on yourself, like, like a person could say, Jim, I'm meditating and I want to, like, rid my mind of all these thoughts, but all these thoughts come. And then I could say, well, offer compassion and hospitality to all this activity in your mind. And then I come back and say, but Jim, I can't seem to offer compassion to this thing going on. And then the answer would be, okay, well, offer compassion to the thing that won't offer compassion, to the mind. So, like, you have to keep on moving, because one of the misnomers about meditation is that you can get the mind completely still, and it depends on what you mean by mind. Like, birds fly, fish swim, and the mind is a constant fountain of activity and thoughts. Like, that's what it's supposed to do. We wouldn't have gotten this far if it didn't do that. We'd walk out in the middle of the street and get hit by a car if it wasn't constantly doing that. And so I think it's more that the mind's going to do what it's going to do, this kind of brain activity. And I think that once you can create a space of hospitality for your thoughts without judgment, resistance, or indulging, then it can become a sort of gateway into an experience of something that's beyond just the brain activity of the mind, body, mind. When people talk about a different mind and consciousness, and that's too much to get into in terms of what the term, what they mean, and so on. But, I'm just saying that sometimes we set up an expectation for people and they feel shame, like they failed it, like I can't somehow get my mind completely at peace, or I can't get my relationship with God to work like the preacher told me it works for him, or, any number of different things. But as even said, come all those who are weary and heavy laden. And there's a certain way maybe we think about that verse, but think of it this way. All you that are worn out by religion, all the checklists, all the burdens of shame, you're not good enough, you're bad at the core, all this stuff. Like, even Jesus invited people to him where the heavy carrying was the message of religion. And he said, okay, I get it. Come to me, and you're going to find rest, because that's not what this is about. This is about checklists and rules and burdens and all these ways you don't measure up and all the things you got to do to be okay with God. Like, come to me and rest. There is no separation from God. and that there's not this fight to perform for your worth and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, we just froze for a millisecond, but it's all good. We're back on track. So there's so much gifts that you have given us today already. Like, I feel so many practical things too that people can apply. So maybe the place where I would want to like tie this in a bow is for those people who want to trust in their relationship with Jesus and want to trust in, let's say, communication with Jesus, but they don't know how to trust and they don't know what those signs are. So maybe if you can conclude here, like, what would you say to someone who's unsure about their relationship with Jesus or unsure how they can continue to trust Jesus after religion? Like, what would you say to those people?
I think what I find is, and if you take my journey as an example, there's all these like false choices that people kind of take on. Like a false choice would be, there's the God of fundamentalist toxic religion, that's behind door number 1, or there's like no God, that's door number 2. Okay, door number 1, there's the Bible, the literal, without error, God tranced writing from, or the Bible is just completely meaningless and has no value at all. Okay, that's a false choice, right? Because not everybody's going to take the Bible literally, and we both know some parts of it you probably shouldn't. So, but I'm just saying, there's, okay, Jesus. Yeah. Jesus is the guy who, the guy killed, Jesus is the one that went to the cross and died.
So hard.
Like there's either that or like Jesus never even existed, right? And there's a lot of people who go there, right? And I get that some people question.
We get that in the Course in Miracles a lot. People will be like, "Oh, well, there is no Jesus; he's just a symbol." I'm like, don't go that far, but yes.
And I personally would argue for the historicity of Jesus. I think there's good reason to. However, like we all have to admit, there's not a lot we know. We basically have 4 gospels that are short, and 3 of them are roughly the same. So, but even if a person wants to go to Jesus as Carl Jung saw Jesus as an archetypal figure with universal significance. So even if you want to go there, you kind of doubt the and we know that even Jesus Christ wasn't really a name. Christ is more of a title. I mean, but so that's a false choice too. So I guess I would just say for people, like, don't fall into the false choice. You don't have to sign up for the God, for the Bible, for the Jesus of fundamentalist religion. Neither do you have to like throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
So explore the possibilities of what God could be, what the Bible could be, what Jesus could be, what atonement could be, what anything outside the boundaries of traditional religion. And I guess this is kind of a wrap up, but I'm not saying that this is like there's a lot of ways a person can do that, right? Like there's all kinds of ways. One way is A Course in Miracles, right? Like there's not maybe a better way for someone to begin exploring an alternative understanding of the framework from which Jesus appears in Christianity, and therefore to understand Jesus differently.
Right.
So, now again, you could also do it through your own careful investigation of Scripture without, the projection of your religious conditioning. But usually it's something that kind of gets that going. Course in Miracles, you mentioned before, you've had Brian McLaren on. Maybe it's a writing by someone who at least like introduces you, because a lot of people they've never been introduced to other thoughts about these things outside of their religious conditioning. Like the toxic patriarchal God of fundamentalist Christianity is not the only way to think about God. It's
Thank
never
God.
been. Yes, it's never been. It's always been the least defensible view of God.
Right.
But we think that that's just it. So I would just say, let yourself explore.
Yeah.
It's not like no one's saying, hey, you got to figure out who Jesus is and have a firm answer in a week, or that like it's got to go a certain way. Just let yourself explore it, but explore it in, you know, in other arenas that opens up the possibility of thinking about it differently, you know. Otherwise, like, you're gonna maybe have a hard time shaking, like an atheist who says, I don't believe in the God of religion anymore. Well, you got to kind of get out of the religion God into, like Baruch Spinoza, who was he was a theologian, philosopher, who completely defined God differently. But like, at least that kind of gets you thinking about God on other terms.
Yes.
So that is something to consider. And I guess the only thing would just be that don't get too stressed about it, because you're not separated from God. And what's ultimately real is real right now. Whatever, no matter what you do or what you figure out or whatever, it's not like your whole deal is dependent on like how well you figure out the answers to all these questions. Your deal is already figured out. All we're talking about is the lived human experience. So you're already, if you want to use these words, divine. It's just that for you, the human part is trying to figure out what you believe about this stuff.
Exactly. Yes. Amen. Beautiful, Jim. I loved everything about this conversation. I love everything about you. I'm going to have all your links down below because I know my people are going to be inspired by you and most probably want to learn more about all the stuff that we talked about. But thank you for your time today.
Yes,
I really appreciate everything.
We'll do it again. And yes, we'll do it again sometime.
I would
And
love to.
like I said before, I'm really appreciate you, Brittany, the space you create for people. People need spaces to investigate something, for example, like who Jesus is outside toxic religious teachings. And you're creating that space for people, which is like an absolutely profound contribution to the world. You do such a good job on creating that space for people. And I'm eternally grateful for you and who you are for others in the world. So thank you.
Oh, Jim, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you everything you're doing too. You inspire me every day I see your stuff. So thank you. Bye, everyone. Thank you for being with us. See you soon.